Hi there, Evil Dia. My name's Steve Goldberg, and you don't know me. I don't know you. But I've never done this before either. But I thought it'd be cool if I made not a reaction, but just a personal one to one video for you to talk a little bit about some of the things that have come up in my head as I've listened to some of your stuff, which is awesome, by the way. Um, we're very much on the same page about a lot of things, but there's a couple things that have been really bothering me. That I keep hearing these things that I'm recognizing now as a trend that maybe you're even a proponent of, and I kind of want to talk about it with you and see what you think. Now, you have no idea who I am and what I do. Uh, so I'm going to have to explain that to you, but let's save that for the second half. I just want to kind of get out some of the thoughts that I have. And by the way, since I never do this, I'm not really set up for streaming or whatever, recording myself. So I'm just trying this. I'm actually using my built-in iMac camera, which is fixed. And so I'm having to kind of make it work. I did one version of this video where I was way too close to the camera. So, well, I was in the same spot, but I had cropped it to fit my face. And then I realized as I was watching the playback that, yeah, it's too close. It looks like I'm trying to be close to the camera, which wasn't the case. It's just how I cropped it to make it all fit properly. So I'm new at this and I'm just trying this one out. I don't edit either. I know how to edit. I've done it before for other things, but I don't want to edit. So it's just going to be me talking. I am going to hit pause real quick though, because I got to take care of a couple things. So I'll pause the recording and I'll just come right back, and you probably won't even notice, but it'll probably look like I'm in a different spot. So that'll look like a jump cut. It's just a pause, and then I'm going to continue in a second. So just hang on a sec. Okay, I'm back. I don't know how that worked. It probably looks terrible, but anyway, so the couple things I wanted to just talk about real quick have to do with things you've said or you've talked about, or I guess let me just say this. I feel like there's a trend, at least among the content that I've seen through your channel, which includes all the things you review, which you do a great job, by the way. There's a couple things that stand out to me that I'd like to kind of talk through. And one of them is this issue of, it seems like there's this overriding assumption in the way a lot of people are approaching language learning, that you are basically on your own to learn the language and you have to use some like special technique or substitute for, I think, of the normal process for learning a language. And I'd like to hear more talk of those things. There's two aspects to it that stand out to me as being lacking in the popular culture, at least so far as is represented by what you cover on your channel. The first is teachers. It feels to me as if there's this assumption that you don't need a teacher, but from my perspective, and I don't know if you're saying that, but from my perspective, the number one thing you have to do to learn a language is find a teacher. You need someone to model the language usage for you, to bounce questions off of in real time, so you don't have to just input a ton of stuff to deduce the answer to a simple question you might have. And you don't have to post something and wait for an answer. You actually have a person you're meeting with regularly who's teaching you the language, actively teaching the language. I don't mean just a resource. I mean an actual teacher. To me, that's always been the most successful strategy. I'll talk about that later. The other aspect is grammar. I think you're one of these people who kind of downplays grammar a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But certainly a lot of people that you talk about do. And there seems to be this weird thing that, heads down, looking in a book, reading and learning grammar is something you shouldn't necessarily spend any time on, or at least not until you're at a certain level. I totally disagree. Now, this just has to do with my own language journey, but I'll tell you an anecdote that kind of like helps see that. And I'll go a little bit more into my past in a minute. But the first thing is that when I learned about grammar in the context of my native language, English. I grew up in Georgia, believe it or not. I don't necessarily have a Southern accent, but you'll hear it if you're educated on that. By the way, we know you're not. a an accent expert by any stretch of the imagination. Sorry, dude, but like I watched that video, you got like 2 right and everything else wrong. There were like 25 accents played in that video. I, on the other hand, got all but 3 right. Seriously. And the 3 I got wrong were ones I just didn't know. I wasn't familiar with that region or that accent. And one of the American ones, I actually think they were under specific. There's actually a very specific region that one of the 2 American, there were 2 accents came from. They didn't talk about. In fact, in either case, one was just Southern. There are actually 6 or 7 different Southern American English accents, but I won't go into that right now. That's a different topic. But I think that grammar is critical. And what I learned when I first studied English grammar growing up, in the 8th or 9th grade, I took an English grammar course from the same woman who actually the next year taught me French. It was my first introduction to the French language. She didn't speak French particularly well. She imagined herself to be like descended from Creole French. So she kind of would put on, jokingly, she would put on what she thought of as a Creole French accent, like from New Orleans or from the out in the middle of Louisiana somewhere, a Cajun accent. But I didn't appreciate it because I didn't know anything about that at the time. So I'm not sure if she was any good at that. But her classical French accent was mediocre and influenced heavily by Southern American English phonetics. But that's an issue that doesn't matter here. But when she taught me English grammar, my eyes were like opened so much. I didn't even know the words for half of these concepts in English. And having studied that first, it was just a normal 8th or 9th grade class in English grammar. That gave me a foundation that was incredible for learning languages. Because later, as I started learning French and then later other languages, it made it so much easier to talk about stuff. Once you understand grammar, you know what a part of speech is. You know what a dependent phrase or clause is. You know what objects are, objects of prepositions. You know the nominative case. You know possessive case. You know all these terms. And those terms actually simplify language learning to a huge degree, especially if you're in a class of languages that share similar grammar. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but I think probably within some margin, all of the, the supposed Proto-Indo-European derived languages all have similar grammar. And so once you understand some of those core concepts, even though one language may be different, that's actually a tool that you can use to distinguish as you're learning a different language. Like when I then later studied German, it made more sense to me why we had talked about the cases like nominative and accusative and dative and what those meant translated into German is really much easier for me to talk about them, to ask questions about them, and to learn them because I already had chunked those concepts in my brain. And still today, I constantly am able to refer quickly to the grammatical context to help my brain process questions about how to use something correctly. And I think you said it the other way around, that like you just knew it was right by hearing it, and then someone had to explain the rules to you, and then you were like, okay, that makes sense. No, I feel like that's backwards. If you're really serious about learning languages, you've got to start with understanding grammar. And I guess I'm a computer scientist. Okay, I'm classically trained in computer science. I worked in nothing but high tech my whole life. Starting in 1979 or even earlier, but 79, I wrote the radar jamming for the F-15, believe it or not, and went on to get a master's in computer science from Stanford, went to work at Apple for 9 years, went to work at Excite, which no one's probably ever heard of. I ended up as a VP of engineering at that company, and then I went a couple other places and ended up at Google. I was there for 17 and a half years before I resigned a few years ago now to essentially go into retirement. And today I just write C++ code all day for an open source, well, soon to be open source plugin that I've built for the X-Plane flight simulator in C++. And so I'm a computer scientist. Syntax and rules for syntax are critically important to me. So maybe my brain is more like what's the word? Predefined. There's a word. Predisposed to learning from grammar, understanding grammar and applying those rules constructively to learn a language. But I actually think that's common for most people. And the more we as influencer, you as an influencer, like support people shying away from learning grammar, I feel like that's just hurting the mission. So I would make a plea to you to start thinking more, even though you personally aren't a big grammarian. I do think grammar is an incredibly powerful tool for talking about language, especially during the language acquisition and learning phase. I think it's really important. I said way more than I meant to say on this. I was more elegant in my first cut of this, but whatever. And our first take. Anyway, so that's those are the two areas that I feel like I'd like to see more proactivity from you and the community around as teachers. You know, we should be motivating people to find a teacher at least who's either native or close to native in a language to really help us acquire that language. Okay, let's talk about my language journey real quick, just so you have some basis to know even who I am and why I'm talking to you. I've never done this before, by the way. So I'm at retirement age, and I've been around the block, but my first real language, I did have Japanese neighbors when I was 6 years old in New York, and I learned a bunch of Japanese phrases. One of them's I never was taught anything about pitch, so I don't know the pitch for this stuff, but I was taught a phrase to make fun of someone that was, this is just a memorized phrase. I don't speak Japanese. I did study it later though, but baka or baka kaba, depending on who you talk to. Baka chindonya omae no kasan de beso. Aha. And I don't claim to, I'm doing a sort of fake accent on top of that. I don't know the Japanese accent. I've not internalized that. But anyway, that meant, you stupid sandwich man, your mother has an outie belly button, which apparently is offensive in Japan. So sorry if I offended anyone. But not that anyone's going to see this. But so I learned Japanese much later. I didn't learn it. I studied it much later, but I only did a very short course in it. I didn't get serious about it. I did learn hiragana, but I've forgotten all of it except for the symbol for to. That's it. To, the English to, to. I learned that symbol. It's like I can write it, you know, it kind of looks like a kneecap more than a toe, but whatever. That was the only one I remembered. The rest I forgot. I never learned katakana, and I never learned kanji, of course, because I've never even tried to tackle any of that sign syllabic or ideographic, ideographic language. You guys call it something else today. It's like logographic. I never heard that when I was coming up. We called it ideo or ideographic. Anyway, so my first language was French. I studied it in high school begrudgingly. I didn't think I was going to be good at it, but I needed an elective, so I ended up taking French from the English teacher, first year French. Was able to acquire it pretty quickly with a decent accent, given that I had no good role model for it. And then my second year in French, I have to tell this anecdote. I went to the senior, so this must have been in 9th grade. I went to 10th grade. And in the senior high school, for the second year of French, they had two teachers, Mr. Caldwell, who was like a normal French teacher, typical French teacher in America. And then there was Mrs., I forgot her name. So she was not she might have been great at the language, but she did not speak it well at all and never claimed to, really. So the very first day in class, I didn't know any of this. I'm registered for her class. I really wanted Mr. Caldwell's just because people had told me his would be better, but I registered for her. So I go into the class. I'm sitting down, wait for the doors to close. And she starts the class in French because it is second year. And she goes, and I quote, "Nous avons 25 personnes dans notre classe." And I raised my hand right away. She was like, "Oui, vous avez une question?" And I'm like, well, she didn't ask it that way. She said, "Vous avez une question pour moi?" or whatever. I'm exaggerating now, but the first part I'm quoting literally. And I raised my hand. I said, non, non, madame, je suis désolé, mais vous avez 23 personnes dans votre classe. And I got up and walked out. Maybe it wasn't as fluent French as I now speak, or fluid French, but it was terrible. Like, I couldn't do that. So I got up and left, and I was able to convince the administration to switch me to Mr. Caldwell's class, and that was the end of that. I don't think it was a surprise to them that she wasn't considered that great. And I was like trying to learn, So anyway, flash forward to my first French class in college at Georgia Tech, and I'm at undergrad. I'm telling you, dude, like, this guy inspired the fuck out of me. And again, this is about teachers. This is about why teachers are so important. This guy was a classic American guy. He grew up in America, but he loved French. He had studied the French phonetics and the French pronunciation, and I'd never heard an American talk like him. He got up and he did a whole immersive first day where he didn't speak English. This was like second year college French. And he starts talking, but I went straight to that, of course. He started talking, like telling stories like some king. Il s'est heurté le front contre le linteau de la porte. He was just very like talking about this stuff. But the one thing he said that really stuck in my brain was how he pronounced the Mediterranean Sea in French. He called it La Mer Méditerranée. And he made sure we heard that he did every E, accented E, as the same exact sound, because in French there's not much variation for that type of thing. So it's Méditerranée, the Mediterranean Sea. Sorry, I forget that not everyone speaks French. So the first thing he said was that this king or whoever died. I didn't say that part, but because he hit his head on the top of the doorway or whatever, and he never explained it, but we understood from him pantomiming it what it meant, because I'd never heard the word linteau de la porte. I knew what a porte was, obviously. But his accent was just so inspirational to hear him, really enunciating and giving us no doubt that you're supposed to say Méditerranée and that's okay. You don't sound silly by doing it. That's how you're supposed to say it. And I started really understanding how accents and pronunciation were critical to like sounding native, or at least approaching fluency at some level for a language, because you really get the feel of how the language works. So he really was great. And that was just another teacher sort of thing. Anyway, so I studied only French in high school. When I got to Georgia Tech, I studied that French class I talked about. And then I just decided I had met so many people by my first month at school. I had met Puerto Ricans and Cubans, which are kind of one group. They were Cubans who had been exiled to Puerto Rico or whatever. So I heard a lot of Cuban and Puerto Rican Spanish. I never heard really Spanish ever before then. And I started hanging out with them. And so at one point I started like trying to form my own Spanish phrases just from hearing them talk. It didn't go well, but the funniest story that I have on that, a little anecdote, is that I was in the back of what they called a guagua, which is Cuban slang for van. And we were like 6 or 7 people, kids driving around in Atlanta. I don't remember what we were doing, maybe going to see a movie or something. And I had a really bad migraine. I get migraines. I'm in the back of the van. I'm holding my head. Someone's asking me what's wrong. So I tried to formulate the Spanish phrase to say I have a headache, purely by taking my French knowledge and applying it to the words I was hearing them say. So I already knew yo tengo meant I have, right? So I knew that word. So I said yo tengo, and when I started talking Spanish, they all shut up. They had been talking, but they heard me talking. They're like, what? He's talking Spanish. Listen. And I go, I was the only non-Spanish speaker in the guagua. And I said, yo tengo mal, which is in French, you would say j'ai mal à la tête. I have pain in my head, sort of. It's not exactly that, but that's roughly what it means. I have a headache. And you can also say j'ai un mal de tête, which is probably how they would say it. But at the time, I was still learning French. So I said j'ai mal à la tête. It's not, I think they'd say j'ai un mal de tête, or j'ai une migraine. You would say that too. But anyway, so I was translating from j'ai mal à la tête into Spanish. And so I said, tengo mal a la teta. And I'm sitting there like, I'm not smiling. I'm like in pain. I'm in agony. I'm like, tengo mal a la teta. And instead of them feeling sorry for me, they exploded in laughter because anyone who speaks Spanish knows what I really said, which is I have bad, which doesn't make any sense in Spanish really, but they could infer what I meant. I have pain. And I said, a la teta, and I'm pointing to my head, but teta in Spanish means titty. It's a very vulgar word. And so you can say tetota for like really big titties. You might have heard that if you don't speak Spanish. But yeah, they were like laughing their heads off as I'm sitting there repeating it, going, la teta, la teta. And they're like, ha, ha, that's not your teta, you idiot. And of course, I learned the hard way what it really was. But interestingly, cabeza, which I'm actually conflicted about where cabeza came from. I'd never heard that word until they taught it to me, which means head in Spanish. And it could, I need to look this up. It could either come from the capo root in Latin or one of those languages, or it could come from Arabic because that Z makes me think it could be Arabic. There's a lot of Arabic influence in Spanish, obviously, since the Moors invaded and took over Spain from, I don't know, sometime in the 15th century, so the 1400s, I think. Should look this stuff up because I'm not an expert in any of that. But so because of that, all those words like almuerzo and alfombra and the word al and the word el, they all come straight from Arabic. And they're also, some of those are also in other Semitic languages like Hebrew, like El. But anyway, that was just really a learning experience to know that the languages did diverge. And one of the reasons was because of the Moors. That might not have been the reason for cabeza. It could just be a different, derivation from the same ultimate root. Who knows? But the one thing I do recall is that I knew at the time, and I reasoned this out myself, that if I were really going to do a good job of transliterating from French to Spanish, I should have called it la testa, because I actually knew this, because I was into grammar and orthographics, which is what this is really about, was that in French, the word tête for head has a circumflex over the E in the middle. So T-E circumflex T-E with no circumflex. And that's because it used to have an S in the middle after the E. That's ES was later replaced with E circumflex in almost all cases. I think there's an exception or two, but they have to do with foreign words. So that were imported into French. But so that tête, if I'd thought about it a little bit longer, I probably would have guessed testa, which would have also made them laugh, because that's something maybe like Cervantes would have written, because it's that old of Spanish. It was, I think, maybe in his era. It's the word for head, but it was before cabeza became the normal word. So testa sort of fell out of favor and is considered archaic now in modern Spanish. But I think, again, I'm no expert, but I didn't realize that S was there, and also I wasn't sure at the time whether that S would have been pronounced in French. So was it la teste in French? I think it was in Middle French or Old French, but I don't know for sure. So I was really worried about that and didn't even want to try testa because I thought that was too close to testicle. Little did I know that teta was titty. Anyway, sorry, long story. I didn't mean to go that deep into it. So that's just to give you some insight into my language journey for Spanish. I became, through the years, I worked in French. I studied in French. I read tons of French. I've written some French. I've done presentations in French. I worked in a company in Paris, actually outside Paris, at this town called Saint-Quentin-Yvelines. So, I mean, je pourrais parler français pour vous, mais je ne sais pas si ça mérite la peine, quoi. I don't know if that's the right expression. That's where I fall short in French, is idiomatic expressions, and also just having not spoken it fluently for a long time, or fluidly for a long time. I'm trying to be careful in my language here because, yeah, I would say I'm fluent in French in the grand scheme of things. I have a very broad vocabulary. I can understand almost everything, especially written, but depending on the accent too, because Quebec French was a whole nother thing I had to learn. I went there like 15 times in 12 years. So because of a sport that I play that had tournaments there and lots of players, so I would go there a lot. And over time, I acquired more of a Quebec accent than a French accent. But they have a really funny, like instead of for one, they say, I can't do it quite, but it's on. It's on. Like it depends on where you're from too. From Trois-Rivières, they say and my mouth's dry, so I can't quite do the R's right this second either. But you get the idea. So I got really good at French. I worked in France for 2 summers, so I didn't stay there that long. I was there for like 10 weeks twice in a row, 2 years in a row, and met tons of French people, made lots of friends, went out to dinner, spoke French pretty much all the time. Not a lot of people spoke English back then. This was the late 80s, to age myself. It was right as I was finishing my graduate program and getting ready to go work at Apple. In fact, Apple gave me a leave of absence to go finish my 10 weeks that I'd committed to do in France before I really started at Apple. So that was, long ago, but French is definitely a language that probably then I would have been C1. I don't know if I ever got to C2, and that's mostly because of idioms. I'm not a big idiom person in foreign languages. I've never been able to acquire them quickly. I have a bunch, but not like an encyclopedic, like I do in English, set of idioms that I can just draw on out of nowhere. I can understand them usually, but there's some that I don't know. And especially as times have changed, I haven't used it regularly in years now, but I do still use it. And, for the most part, especially if I talk for a day or so, if I go to France for a day, it really comes back very quickly. It's not like you've said in the past. Once you master a language, it's there forever. And that's true for French. I absolutely can speak French, no problem at all. And I believe I have a really good accent, but I can't really demonstrate it because my mouth is super dry from talking, and I don't usually talk this long. But I can, if you want, later I can give you some more demos of that. But I also studied Spanish, as you know, and my Spanish, I only took 1 year of Spanish. I don't claim full proficiency in Spanish, but I can definitely, since I left school and moved out west, and now it's true back there too, there's more and more Spanish speakers in your daily life. And I've spoken tons of Spanish since I've been out west, and I live in California now. And, my Spanish is only getting better over time as I keep using it. But again, I don't have a lot of idioms, and my vocabulary is a little smaller than my French vocabulary. It's a lot smaller because I've never read. Okay, I read one book in Spanish, which was a real doozy. I'd actually tried Cervantes and immediately closed it after the first paragraph. I couldn't get through the first paragraph. But that's not, I don't know, that doesn't necessarily count. But I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Cien Años de Soledad. By the way, if you speak Spanish, you'll know that I said that in a funny way I want to tell you about briefly. But 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez is the book. And it's a fantastical book, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to review it right now, but I did read that in Spanish. I had to have a dictionary and kept looking things up. And I'm not sure how much I retained from having read it because it was like one book. And it was so much work just to get through it. And then I reread it in English, and I feel like it was a totally different book. So I don't think I really understood it right in Spanish. But I never did get that far down this path of Spanish. But I speak it well because I'm talking it all the time. I have practically no accent. There's so many regional accents for Spanish that people don't know where I'm from. A lot of times they think I'm from Colombia because that's kind of a neutral accent. But I've also acquired a bit from the very beginning of a Cuban Puerto Rican accent because that's how I first learned it. But now I probably have more of a Mexican affect to my Spanish because there's so many Mexican speakers around where I live that's usually what I talk, or one of the Central American versions that are very similar. I learned a whole bunch of interesting stuff about Spanish. I can probably recognize where someone's from generally in Spanish for a lot of countries, because I know lots of little things about each different country's weird usages. So, for example, I'm not sure I'm right about this, but when I said Cien Años de Soledad, I said cien, not cien. A Mexican would probably say Cien Años de Soledad. And they might even make the T at the D. If they're really elite, they might make the D at the end into like a TH sound. It's a weird affect that they have in the elite speak in Mexico. At least that's what I've heard. But I can't imitate that one. But in Cuban, Puerto Rican, Caribbean Spanish, you hear a lot more of the name, like the sound at the end of their ends. I can't think of other words right this second, but cien is a good example. So that if you hear someone saying siang, I usually wonder if they're from the Caribbean, and usually I can hear other words like bicho might mean bug in one language and dick in the other, and thingamajig in yet the other. So depending on what country and what little words they're using, I can almost always kind of tell where they're from, especially Argentina. That one's obvious. But I think that's something you can't do, Evil Dia, because you don't do accents, even in English. You can't decipher them, but that's fine. It's all good. I'm better than you. That's okay. We can live with that. I'm just better than you all around. I'm kidding. Anyway, slightly kidding. I'm just kidding. Anyway, so the Spanish, what was I saying? And why was I saying all this about Spanish? Anyway, let's pop up. So Spanish is something that I do speak quite well. I do have I can put on different accents in Spanish. I can't do Castellano particularly well. The Spanish from like Barcelona or other, maybe central Spain, I can't do those accents. Well, Barcelona's not. I don't know the word. See, this thing, I don't know enough about Spain. I have been to Barcelona and Madrid. They do sound different to me. I can't understand Basque or Catalan. I was robbed by a Catalan guy once, but anyway, that's a whole nother story. But I don't speak any of those languages at all. I don't claim to. I've never studied them. But Spanish was sort of like, Spanish and French are kind of my best foreign languages. I have studied a lot more languages. In fact, one of my claims to fame at Georgia Tech was that I had taken 4 language classes at the same time while being a computer science student. It actually took me an extra year to graduate. I did 5 years of undergrad at Georgia Tech only because I took so many language classes. I was kind of famous there for that. I took 1 year. I took 3 quarters. Well, you were on the quarter system. You would call them semesters most places. That would be 2 semesters, but I took 3 quarters of French. At that point, it was like 3rd year French or whatever. Spanish, German, and Italian. So, and those other languages, Spanish, German, and Italian, that was the only time I ever studied them formally. German, I actually got pretty good at. Never got above, let's say, A2. I doubt I'm above A2. I think I'm still in the A1 range, if I'm honest. But ich spreche Deutsch wie ein Kind. Mein Wortschatz ist so wenig, dass ich nichts verstehen und nichts sagen kann. Like, I know the grammar, I know the way to speak, I know the accent. It's not perfect right now, but I can put on a pretty good German accent. High German accent. But like, my vocabulary is really weak. I wish I'd studied it longer. I wish I'd read in it, but I've never done that. I've never invested the time in German. So that 1 year of German plus some real world experience speaking German puts me at a very like simple conversational level, like a kid is what I said in German. I said, I speak like a child. So maybe if I were visiting like a 5-year-old child in German, like if my friend had a child, I could have a perfect conversation with that little kid, but I cannot carry on a full conversation with an adult in German. I don't think I ever could. But I definitely understand the language. I know how it works. I know how it sounds. Of course, speaking English helps because obviously English is a Germanic language. But I don't think I speak German, not fluently for sure. And I don't read it fluently either. There's so many words I don't know. It's frustrating. And of course, that means that I have no idioms at all. Well, I have a few because obviously you learn pattern sentences. That was another thing is, we won't talk about it now, but pattern sentences are another really important technique that I know you agree with. And I had an example, but I'll throw that out if we talk again about this stuff. But so my Italian, briefly, did not go anywhere. So I studied for that 1 year. At the end of that year, the Italian teacher gave me a C, even though I excelled in her class. She gave me a C because I had only gotten a hint of this once when she had mentioned something like, don't you have Italian family? And I'm like, and I thought she was just being nice, like trying to compliment my accent or my fluidity with whatever we were doing. And I was like, no, I've never had any exposure to Italian. I've studied, I didn't tell her this. This is my mistake. I didn't tell her that I was concurrently taking Spanish and French and German in the same school. She didn't really know. I think she was not like a full-time professor there. So she would come just to teach the class. So I don't think she really knew that I had this sort of like storied linguistic expertise that I was bringing to the table. So she just thought, how can he possibly have such a good accent and understand the grammar and the basic rules so quickly? There must be something in the words too, the vocabulary, because they're almost identical to the Spanish and the French merged together. So like, I think she like just did not believe me. So she gave me a C at the end of the year based on nothing, just based on her gut. And of course, the head of the department, and that was really important because that year was when I was starting to put in applications for grad schools and I needed it to look good. And she screwed up my 4.0. So thankfully she changed it after the head of the department called her and said, no. Steve Goldberg does not already know Italian. He's not from an Italian family. In fact, this last year he took German, French, and Spanish. I had him for German and he didn't know nothing when he got into my class. So like, yeah, he kind of defended me and she changed the grade. Thank God. But anyway, that's another little anecdote. So, after school, I then dabbled in tons of other little things. Oh, I forgot to tell you my Esperanto story, which actually predates all of this. So it didn't predate French, but it predated all the other stuff. So when I was at Georgia Tech, before I started taking the language courses besides French, because I was always taking French there, I did a correspondence course. I don't even know if you know what that means, because that's the thing of the past. In Esperanto, I discovered on alt.lang.esperanto, or maybe just alt.lang, which I'm not even sure it was in the alt category yet. This is early on. It was Usenet, if you know what that is, but it was UUCP based. So that's where the original Usenet was. Long story, won't go into it now. This was in 1982 or 3. Okay, this is ancient internet history. And people would put like posts saying, hey, if you want to learn, say, Esperanto, send me a self-addressed stamped envelope. See, I can't even speak English. A self-addressed stamped envelope, and we'll send you some materials for the first lesson. So I did that for Esperanto. I think it was even in the UK. I can't remember. It must have been the US because it was just a regular stamp. I didn't have to buy some special airmail thing. So yeah, I think it was in the US somewhere. And I sent that in and they sent me back the first lesson and I did the lesson. I did the work. I submitted it to them when I sent the next one and no money was involved, right? This is just, you just send them an envelope. That's all you needed to do. And they would grade your results and then send you the next lesson in the envelope, in the next envelope you'd included. So it was pretty awesome. And you'd need 2 stamps for the outside because you'd have like 3 things inside it. It might be more than whatever the rate for 1 stamp was. But other than that, and they would send you the thing, you'd do it. So I did that maybe 2 or 3 round trips and then kind of fell out of it because I probably moved on. I was taking all the other language courses. So I did get a lot of exposure to the basics of Esperanto early on. But mi ne povas paroli Esperanton. I never learned the accent either. I didn't have any model to hear it from. I understand a lot of the syntax from it because that's my thing. And I understand why Zamenhof made the decisions he made. I don't know what changed over the years. Some of this is probably old information that I was given as well through these lessons. But anyway, I studied Esperanto before you did, just for the record. But I don't speak Esperanto at all. Ne povas paroli Esperanton. What was I going to tell you? Oh, after I left college, I started dabbling in languages over the years as things came up and I would be exposed to something. So I had the opportunity to have a few friends and I go in together on a Japanese tutor sort of situation where they taught us, they tried to teach us Japanese. We didn't stick with it though. So this was like maybe 3 months of a person coming in once or twice a week to our little group and, doing like immersion in Japanese. I don't think it was a husband and wife couple, and I don't think they ever spoke English in front of us. They were always talking Japanese to try to get our brains tuned to it. I don't know if that really worked as well for me, but on the side, I built a flashcard app that I could use to learn hiragana, and I did that, but I've since forgotten all my hiragana, except to. I think I already said that. If I did, I'm sorry. And then I learned maybe like 150 words. Most of them are gone. So yeah, I know a lot of little pattern sentences. That was the pattern sentence example I wanted to give you. It's a great one. It doesn't apply anymore. It's an anachronism, but the pattern sentence, for anyone who speaks Japanese, they'll know. And by the way, remember, I did not learn the pitch, so I don't know the pitch. I don't know the accent even. But it's effectively sono hen ni denwa ga arimasu ka? Which is, in this area, is there a telephone, I guess payphone or public phone available? You know, sono hen ni means around here. And then denwanga means, I think, place to get like phone booth. Because denwa, I think, means telephone, and ga is anyway, it's I forget the grammar word for it, but it means it's the object, right? Arimasu ka means is there. So, as a question. So I understood that, and I have a bunch of pattern sentences in my head, but I don't know how useful they are now. I've never really tried to speak it with anyone. Maybe I'll throw out a word or two just to make them laugh, but that's it. My old thing I told you when I was 6 was still there too. Baka baka chino nyamai no kasandebe, so ha ha. But that's it for Japanese. I do not speak Japanese, nor do I claim I can even get by in Japanese. No, I just have some exposure to it. Other languages in that category include, and I think it's worth talking about these because you start learning things from other languages. Norwegian, I won't go into it now, but I did study Norwegian for 6 months at the Brothers of Norway Lodge near where I lived at the time, in preparation for a trip to Norway where I failed miserably to use my Norwegian in a place where no one spoke English. And I needed to find out if the room I was staying in, if there was a refrigerator, because I had some perishable stuff I wanted to put away. And I couldn't remember the word for refrigerator. And then finally I'm pantomiming to the lady, and she finally goes, "Kjøleskapet." And I'm like, yeah, kjøleskapet, that's the word. It means the refrigerator. And it's the ET ending just means the. It's a weird language. But kjøleskapet, I can see it written, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right at all. I think I'm not. I never got that good at it. It means like the cooling chamber or room or closet or something. I don't know. The refrigerator is what it means. So kjøl is like chill, right? Anyway, so that didn't work, and I was embarrassed because I couldn't remember it. But the funny part about that was when she then took me by the shirt down the hall to show me the kjøleskap, and I thought she was taking me to my room, but she didn't. She went then down some stairs into what was the basement of this hotel. I started to get creeped out. This is before that movie where they get abducted and cut into pieces. Hostel. It's before that movie. But she like opens this door to what's just a room, but it's a very cold room. And then when I realized this was a walk-in refrigerator, and she gave me this key for this tiny little like drawer, kind of locker drawer with a whole bunch of other ones. And that was my space to put stuff in their walk-in refrigerator. And that was how it worked. It was like a communal walk-in refrigerator with individual little compartments. It felt a little Soviet to me, even though this wasn't, I mean, I don't think the Soviets ever controlled this area. If anything, it was the Nazis for a short period. But anyway, that was my kjøleskapet story. I did have a connection to Norwegian, and I had friends who spoke it. So I did practice it and start to get okay at very basics, and then I gave it up. I just couldn't deal. I also studied much more seriously Czech, which is in a different class of language. It's still European, but it's a different type of language for sure. And there aren't as many cognates, and it was a lot harder for me to learn. Norwegian bothered me because I could never get the accent right, and that's what I really cared about at the time. So it was really frustrating. I couldn't do a lot of the sounds in Norwegian, especially some of the vowels. It's worse in Swedish, but I never really studied it. I just tried to learn the phonetics in Swedish. It failed miserably. But for Czech, I went to Czech Republic for the same reason I went to Montreal. Probably, I'm not probably, absolutely 15 times I went to Czech Republic. And in 12 or 13 years. And that's because sometimes there were 2 events in 1 year, a couple times. So I would go every year in a row, and then sometimes twice in the same year. and I learned quite a lot of Czech. First I had no exposure to it. It was very interesting. I thought maybe I should learn this. Before I went the second time, I paid the Czech teacher at Stanford, where I had graduated from long ago by now. I paid her to meet me because I couldn't take the course legally through Stanford. They just wouldn't allow it. It just wasn't possible. As an alumnus, didn't matter. It was just not possible. So what I did instead was just reached out to her directly, and she agreed to meet me at the library on Stanford campus once or twice a week for 3 or 6 months. And she taught me Czech, and she brought Xeroxes of actual photocopies of the Czech textbook that they used. She didn't want me to buy the textbook. It was funny. So I would have these, she'd give me a new chapter every so often. I don't know what I did with that. And so I did learn quite a lot of Czech. First time I'd ever approached a Slavic language. My brother spoke fluent Russian for a while, but not anymore, I don't think. But that was a great eye-opener for me for the Slavic languages. And now I see cognates all throughout Russian. And when I can figure out what the Cyrillic says through Russian, the nice thing about Czech is it's written in a Latin alphabet, which is great. So I'm pretty good at the basic pronunciation of Czech, not perfect. I learned it much later, so I think my ability to acquire the accent wasn't as good. I know lots of little silly phrases people say, like, I don't know, Kami deme means like, where are we going? I mean, I can actually speak it, but very slow, very simple, much worse than German. So if you imagine my German's barely conversational, I'm not really over that hurdle with Czech. I know a lot of words. I know a lot more words than I thought I did, but I can't do Czech, and I certainly can't write it or read it particularly differently. I learned it just by talking for the most part. I mean, I know what all the words, I see spellings when I talk, so that's fine. But I don't, and I understand grammar, so I know the grammar of Czech pretty well too, but that doesn't mean I can speak it or read it. Like, I would understand maybe parts of it, but not really be able to speak it. So I've dabbled in it, don't speak it, probably not even really mid A1 in that language. I don't think I'm really very far at all, really. And if I put time into it though, I think I go pretty quickly, because I have a good foundation at this point, but again, not big enough vocabulary. Some phrases that I know that are stock phrases that I can use appropriately and alter as needed to fit the circumstances. I understand their vocative case. It's one of the interesting cases that's different. Vocative. I can almost always form the correct vocative. So like if someone's name is Vashek, then you call him Vashku. When you call him, you say, hey, Vashku, right? Kami deme or ideme do prdela or whatever, right? I can say all that silly stuff. But jak se máš, Vashku, right? I know how to do that with all the different types of names, with different endings of names, different genders, all that stuff of names. I mean, like female names. But, and I can do possessive. I can do basic past tense. I don't think I can do any of the complicated past tenses. I can do future tense. So I know all that. I just don't have a very big vocabulary. It's big, but it's not big enough. It's not over the hump. All right. Anyway, that's my language journey. I've probably studied a few other little languages, but nothing serious. So I really only speak, let's say, 4 languages at any level of competence at all. 3 that are pretty solid. I mean, where I'm counting English. So I speak really solid French when I want to. If I practice a little, if I get involved and go and immerse myself in it, I can speak French till I'm blue in the face, no problem. It may not be the highest tier. I think I've never been C2 in French. I think I'm probably at the best I've been C1 at French, because I've never gotten all those idioms, but I can talk about any topic in French for sure. I mean, yeah, I have a pretty broad vocabulary there. And Spanish is probably better than I think it is, honestly. I mean, I've had a ton of exposure to Spanish, and it's a lot of the same words when you get into the more sophisticated language too. So sometimes when I hear someone saying something that's a more C2-like thing in Spanish, I have no trouble understanding it, because a lot of times it's the same exact roots as the other Latin-derived languages. So, or Romance languages, I guess, is the correct way to say it. So that's it. I have lots of ideas of things I want to talk to you about, but I'll stop here. And I was trying to talk for 30 minutes. Let's see, what did I do? I can't see the timer where I'm at, so I don't know. I'll find out when I'm done. But hopefully I didn't go too far over. And let me know what you think. I'm curious. Really about my two basic things I wanted to bring up. All right. See ya. Thanks. Bye.